Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, everybody, and welcome to today's Art of Procurement interview show. And today I'm sharing with you an interview that I recorded live a couple of weeks ago at the Zycus Horizon conference that I attended. And my guest is Alex Brown, and Alex is the Chief Procurement Officer for GLOBALFOUNDRIES. Alex is going to share a little bit of his background in the interview, but he's been in supply chain and procurement since about 1980. So fast forward to 1988, and Alex joined semiconductor company Advanced Micro Devices, so better known as AMD. He joined them as a manager and then progressed over the course of his career to the role of Vice President of Global Supply Management, which was essentially their title for CPO. Well, in 2009, AMD divested their manufacturing business into a company called GLOBALFOUNDRIES. And GLOBALFOUNDRIES have since expanded further. They've bought a couple of other companies backed by the government of Abu Dhabi. And subsequently, a couple of years ago, Alex actually joined GLOBALFOUNDRIES as their Chief Procurement Officer. And today's conversation is really focused on the decisions that Alex made throughout his career to climb the ladder to be a CPO. So we talk about a range of topics, including his thoughts on procurement certification programs. He has a lot of experience in procurement transformation, and I talk a little bit about, how he was able to drive procurement transformation within AMD when he was actually, an incumbent within the business. He didn't come from the outside, so he was already known within the company. And we also discuss some of the guidance he provides to managers and directors today as they seek to stand out and move up the corporate ladder. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I really like to, hear stories from CPOs, from procurement leaders, because it's something that we just don't get to do very often, to really understand their perspective and their journey. So that's really what today's show is all about. So with all that being said, let's roll the tape. Hi there, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of The Art of Procurement. And I'm actually recording this episode on site at Zycus' 2016 Horizon Conference, just as the conference wraps up. And I'm delighted to be joined today on the show by Alex Brown, the CPO of GLOBALFOUNDRIES. So, Alex, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to take part in this podcast.
Great. No, and it's great to do it face-to-face. That always makes such a difference.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of directions that we could have taken today. We did a little bit of work in advance to talk about different topic areas. What I really wanted to talk about today was careers.
Sure.
Specifically some of the decision points that you took as you pursued your career in procurement, and some of the advice that you then give to others as you manage and mentor them as they look to follow in your footsteps. Before I do that, I just really want to quickly just get a couple of takeaways from you from the event the last couple of days here at Horizon.
Well, first of all, I am impressed with the progress of product development from Zycus. Mm-hmm. I was with AMD before GLOBALFOUNDRIES, and GLOBALFOUNDRIES is a spinoff of AMD. But my first involvement with Zycus was probably 5 years ago. Yeah. And their suite of solutions were three: e-sourcing, iPerform, which was supply performance management, and analytics. So what they showed yesterday was a full suite, including P2P. And so I'm really impressed with the amount of progress that's been made over that 5-year period of time.
Well, one of the things that they said, and this is the first time I've been at the conference, was that they don't really have any intentions of IPOing or of selling the business. I mean, is that something that's important to you as a customer when you think about consistency, if it were, of kind of vision and the model?
Well, I think there is an importance, and based on history, I would say it's good that they don't have a plan to be IPO'd and or looking to sell the company. Yeah. As I look back in history, there have been many companies in this space, and as they were acquired, a significant portion of their content went away, or they became a small part of a big company, and then the prices go up and the engagement become very complicated.
Yeah.
And so it would be very positive if, in fact, Zycus remained independent.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I took away from the conference, which was, again, this is the first time I've been here, but it was a fact that, to me, it seems like it's been set up not as a, here is everything you need to know about the company. The conference truly is about thought leadership. And it wasn't about trying to sell everything to do with the company down the throats of everybody that got here. It was, how do we use this as a way of encouraging discussion around what is the future of the profession, what are some of the innovations coming our way. And that's probably the biggest thing I took away.
Yeah, and they've been very good from that vantage point in providing the visionary approach to what's going on from a procurement standpoint and supply management, although they do a lot of demos and customer specific. So I think where they've engaged with a customer, whatever that customer is interested in, they have, in fact, a demo set up so that customer can actually see how it would work.
Kind of best of both worlds.
Yeah, it is.
So what I wanted to do, I mentioned it in the intro, was talk about careers a little bit. And I was interested to know, as you pursued your journey to become a CPO. Well, first of all, is that where you actually wanted, where you saw yourself? Was it a deliberate kind of career path to become a CPO, or is it something that, for a variety of different reasons, not that you stumbled across it, but that it just kind of fell into your lap more than something that you pursued?
Well, I think there was a point in time when there was a pursuit.
Yeah.
But early in my work life, at that point in time, there wasn't even a CPO job title or description. I've had essentially 4 different careers. I started as an engineer working for a technology company. I then moved into sales with one of the big, I'm going to call it Xerox machines.
Right.
It was Xerox. And then I did material planning. I managed the materials planning organization before I got into procurement. So I've had essentially 4 different careers where I've worked. But I think the key, though, is through that journey, there was learning along the way that prepared me when the opportunity came along to be promoted into the CPO role.
And did you feel that it was a little bit unique to have those different perspectives, like those early careers that you brought into procurement, when you're working with people who have just got a sole procurement career? So you mentioned sales, for example. Sales is one of the key things to be successful in procurement, but we're not exactly the best at sales, or it's not something that comes naturally to us. So did that help you? Was that an advantage, do you think?
It absolutely was, because one of the things that you end up being measured on is how well you deal with suppliers. And particularly, we always talk about negotiation and, how efficient are you as a negotiator, And quite frankly, that's a whole nother topic to talk about, the negotiation skills. But because I had been very specifically trained in regards to selling techniques and how to close, I was able to have very deep discussions with a lot of the suppliers that we were dealing with, and in many instances, the supplier would ask me, "Have you worked in sales?"
You're beating them at their own game.
Yeah, that's right. Because back during the paper age, there was this statement is, once you put the paper on the table, the order on the table, and you get a signature, you step up and walk out.
Right.
And there were so many times the supplier, we would close, and I'd say, "Okay, yep, you have this order," and they'd continue to sell, and I'd say, "Wait, you don't need to continue to sell to me. I've already committed to you." So yes, the sales training came in. Was a very specific enabler in regards to the pathway to my success in procurement.
And is that something that you encourage others then, the people that work for you, to pursue?
Well, I'm going to give you a very specific example as I answer that question. One of the procurement re-engineering projects that I was involved in the past, we had very specific training on consultative selling.
Yeah.
because you had the thought was, if we are changing the procurement role, we are changing the expectations around procurement, and as we go out and talk to our stakeholders, you have to be able to sell that.
Right.
And so I think it's very important that not only from a procurement leadership standpoint, but also down through the ranks of procurement staff should understand some aspects of selling, because it becomes very important. It fits under the category of influencing.
Right.
And that's one of the success factors that we have listed within our organization in regards to how to be successful.
Does it differ based on whether you're in indirect or direct?
I think it may. And the reason I caution is that, at least in my industry, the procurement organization has been able to not only embrace the role, but the stakeholders have embraced procurement.
Yeah.
And so when you think about spend management on the direct side, it's about 100%.
Right.
On the indirect side, between marketing and legal and some other organizations, the ability to sell what you do and how you do it is very important. But I think that the most important, though, is when you get that opportunity, is creating value.
Yeah.
Because regardless of what it is, if you're not creating value, you're a waste and you're in the way.
Yeah, they'll look to circumvent you in the future.
That's right.
And then, I guess in direct, you always have that mandate that you have to use procurement, but you can still use procurement to different extents. With an indirect, you don't know about even the spend until it's gone. Unless
That's right.
Been
There's no forecast in most instances. There's when I look at the budget for the year for like the marketing department, there's X million of dollars on one line with no detail.
Right.
And so
you only find out about it when it's in your spend analytics. Yeah. It's already gone.
Yeah.
Where it went.
But I think that's where the collaborative approach comes into play, where you meet with the BU and the BU heads, and you can get information in regards to what they're planning, and you use that information as part of your category plans that you would then work with the BU on to execute.
So one of the questions I had was, earlier in your career, you pursued procurement certification. I think it was the NAPM.
Yeah.
Would you still recommend that procurement professionals go the line of licensing and professional certification, or is it kind of case by case?
I would recommend for all, as I speak to my staff today and in the past, I think it's important to be recognized as a proficient professional in regards to what we do. Just like if you're a CPA, there's no when you're sitting with a CPA, you don't ask him to work out a problem, accounting problem for you. You make the assumption that based on the fact that they are a CPA, that they have the knowledge and the skills. I think the same thing plays for procurement. If you are certified as a procurement manager or any of the new certifications, when you walk in the room and you have that designation, I think there's an assumption then that you know what it is, and you get a different opportunity to engage in the discussion.
It's kind of a foundational thing. Do you think that changes as somebody has more experience in the profession? So when you look at hiring, is that something that plays as important a role in a hiring decision for a more senior role than it is for a more junior role?
I think it's very important from a junior standpoint, and even if they don't have the certification, that they are working toward the
There's
certification.
a commitment to invest.
That's right. I have many applicants that come in to interview for a job, and what they routinely says, I want to work for this company. I want to work for you because I want to learn procurement. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I would hope you'd already know something about procurement and or you're working on it.
Right.
And then that becomes the space. Now, for more senior experienced individuals, it may not be as important, and what you have to play then is what does that experience bring to the table versus a certification.
Right. And something you touched on there is around people maybe coming into the profession you may have applicants who are still learning procurement, then they better be bringing other things to you that you need, that because you can bring, for example, using marketing as an example, you can bring a marketer in who knows marketing inside out into the organization if they have that background and teach them procurement, but you don't want to be teaching both things at the same time.
Absolutely.
It's like one or the other, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So when you grew through AMD, after you joined them, all the way up into the senior ranks in procurement, what were some of the decision points within your growth in AMD that pursued you, or that led you to pursue, the senior level role that you had there at the time that you transitioned into GLOBALFOUNDRIES?
Yeah. So one of the things that, as I referenced, I've had 4 different careers. Yeah. There comes a time when you have to look at how do you what I call destabilize from your comfort zone, and so. At AMD, when I started, and I've always worked in Austin, Texas, and the headquarters was in Silicon Valley, but when I started at AMD, the Texas site was an outpost.
Right.
And I started with a fairly narrow scope of responsibility. But over time, as the industry changed, as the company changed, I always looked for an opportunity to do something different.
Yeah.
And it was important for me to be in front of the decision makers, particularly if there was a problem. I thrived on a problem.
You didn't hide.
If that was a problem,
yeah.
I wanted to stand in front of the executive and explain to him what I was going to do about it and why I was going to do it.
So you want to be a problem solver.
That's right, which put me in a position where over time there was respect generated for not only what I was doing, but for me, the individual. So at some point in time through that evolution, there was a very interesting situation, and I'm going to do it quickly. I'm going to tell you this story. So when you think about re-engineering, normally you have a visionary and an executor. Somebody, the visionary has his and then you got to have somebody to go make it happen.
Yeah.
Well, I had that situation where I was the guy to go push to make the change in the organization, processes, etc. Well, after a couple of years, that individual left, but we had made significant progress in regards to the organization. And the executive who the procurement organization role reported into said, Alex, you can have this job, but you got to move to California.
Okay.
And, I went home, talked to the family. It's like, no, I pass.
Yep.
It's a great opportunity, but I pass. Well, after about 3 months of the company interviewing, in that last month, I was asked to be on the interview team, and I was like, "Well, wait a minute, I'm interviewing for this role that I wanted." That they won't give me. So anyway, after that last interview, the executive came in and said, "Alex, what do you think about the last candidate?" And I said, "Hey, I don't want to be, self-grandizing, but quite frankly, I don't think that individual can do the job."
Yep.
And the next day, the exec came to me. And somewhat of a backhanded compliment, he said, "We can't find anybody better than you, so you're going to be promoted to the CPO role." So it was somewhat interesting.
Yeah. So it was somewhere inside there was a compliment.
I'm still looking for it, though.
When you became CPO of AMD and you pursued, I think, a transformation program or a number of transformation programs within AMD and procurement, how were you able to do that as a legacy employee? Because most of the times when companies are looking to do that, they just bring somebody from the outside, they have a clean sheet, they can upset everybody and typically do, and there's a lot of chaos that ensues. It's less, I think, normal for somebody to have that remit who's grown within the company.
Yeah, so one thing happened very specifically within the company, and that is I mentioned that the corporate headquarters was in San Jose, Silicon Valley. But there was a transition in the CEO. And the CEO came from a company in Austin, and he hired his CFO from Austin. So now the CEO and the CFO are from Austin, and they're new.
The balance of power has shifted.
That's right. And I'm the CPO now, reporting to the CFO. And he had a mandate. And So what he did, though, to enable me to be successful was demand certain things from the rest of the organization, including the manufacturing operation, the sales operation, and specifically marketing, where we had not played before. And because we were spending a significant amount of money in the marketing space, and he wanted to reduce that, so he said, Alex, go in and find out what's going on and make it different. So the make it different part ended up being for the enterprise, not just for marketing.
So did you use marketing as kind of a pilot program and then broadened it, or did it broaden pretty quickly?
Well, actually, I used direct materials as a platform because we already had processes established. We already had engagement models. We had supplier performance management already in place. So I just overlaid it onto the indirect space for the rest of the business. So we didn't have to invent anything. But what I did do is I used external research to show where we were, research and some enablement in regards to organizational assessment to see where we were, where the gaps were. And then I was able to use the platforms that we already had in place to show what the value
get the investment into it.
That's right.
Did your new CEO and CFO understand the value of procurement as you started, or was it something where you had to change their mindset to show what the value of what you could do was?
Well, I think it was a situation where the CFO was very in tune in regards to procurement and the procurement role. The CEO had to be converted over time. And, at a different time, I'll tell you some stories about my direct engagement with the CEO, because we lived not in the same neighborhood, but I passed his house, and there were several times when his admin would ask if he could catch a ride with me. And it's very difficult riding for 30 minutes with the CEO in a car.
Yeah, it's pretty intense 30 minutes. So one of the things I was interested, we talked a little bit about your career and how some of the decisions that went into the roles that you took. Now you're obviously mentoring and training a lot of people within your organization. I'm sure outside of your organization as well, just because of the position that you have within the profession. What are the kind of things that you recommend to professionals to help them when they think about their career development? I want to focus on a couple of different areas. One is somebody who's a manager who's seeking to become a director, somebody who's a director who is looking to really take the leap to being a CPO. And let's start with a manager to a director. What are some of the things that you recommend that they do to stand out, to really position themselves to be successful?
Well, I think the statement you just made, stand out, is very important. And then the question would be, how does a manager who wants to get promoted stand out? So there's a couple of things that I would recommend and do today. One is having a mentor, and not just a mentor, say, within the reporting ranks that you have, but a mentor outside of the reporting ranks, where that individual can give you insights in regards to what's going on in the organization. Because most organizations, corporate organizations, have politics and have things that are going on that you'll never see at the manager's level. So if there's someone that you can share with what you're working on and some of the problems that you are dealing with, they may be able to give you a perspective in regards to what's going on in the company. The other thing, though, that I tell a lot of people is don't be part of the herd. And you, what I've seen is you have individuals, and not that we talk about the water cooler up Monday morning, the water cooler conversations, but the individuals who really are looking to advance and have a development plan, which is very important, with some very specific things on that development plan relative to them getting to that next level. So I tell them, execute your development plan, don't be part of the herd, and have a mentor. Those are the things that I think are very important. And when you get the opportunity, based on your preparation, be ready to do something with it.
And how important is kind of a commitment to self-development then? Because you see a lot of people, and I'm sure I've been at that part, in my career, where you're working for a big company, they have all these training resources and these fancy programs, and so you're kind of sitting back and waiting for something to happen. how important is taking the investment or taking kind of your own initiative to develop your own career rather than waiting for it to happen?
Yeah, well, I think that goes back to the earlier discussion about certification. I've had many individuals that come in the organization, and as we talk about ISM certification, the first thing they ask is the company going to pay for it?
Right.
And if I said, no, the company isn't going to pay for it, that's part of your personal development, they just said, they throw their hands up and like, okay, I'm not doing it.
Right.
But I think if you're going to advance in the organization, you have to invest in yourself. And sometimes, there is a monetary investment required, but a lot of times it's just time.
Yep.
How you allocate your time to go off and read and see what's going on in your profession, and how do you take that knowledge and use it, from a day-to-day standpoint.
It's funny you mentioned that about the ISM, because there is this perception that as soon as you've finished your college education, that all your education from that part forward is for the benefit of your employer, and therefore your employer must pay for it, rather than thinking things in terms of, I'm actually investing in my own continued education, which is going to be agnostic to the company that I work for. So maybe I should be setting aside a little bit of my paycheck to actually continue to develop and invest in my own development.
Yeah, I have a very specific example of a young man I hired when he was, I think, about 27, 28 years old, coming out of school, had worked at one job. And so he came to work for AMD, and he had been there maybe 3 years. He completed his MBA while he was working, and got his ISM certification, and became my successor over and above a lot of other people who had already been there. So I think when you talk about investing in your own career, it becomes very important.
Right. So how about the key, we talked about manager to director. And I know that in different organizations, the ladders and the hierarchy is very different. So it's hard to say, to flag one role type to another role type. But just generally speaking, you're a director, now you manage other managers. How do you take that leap then to be in kind of the rarefied that is head of department, CPO? Because that's where you've really got to stand out.
That's exactly right. One of the things that I've looked at that becomes increasingly important is how strategic does that individual think? Because the expectation is that individual is setting the direction for the organization. Right. He's not executing somebody else's strategy. He's got to define the strategy. Then he's got to manage those people, the managers. And so I think there are two keys. One, how do you define strategy? How do you set strategy? How do you understand what's going on in your segment of the business? And then how do you enable your managers to be successful? Because we can, and I know this to be a fact, you can be no more successful than the individuals that report to you. If they're successful, you'll get pushed on up by default. Right. But if you can't go in and say, okay, I got 5 managers and 3 of them are just terrible.
Just ignore them and focus.
Right. That doesn't work.
Right.
The organization has to be successful, and that comes into play with leadership. Now, I know there's a lot of definitions for leadership, and sometimes it's dependent upon the company, because you can have a driving type company where you just kicking butt and taking names. But you can, at a different company, it may be totally different in regards to what leadership looks like. But again, back to the mentoring at the director level, you want to understand what's the culture of the company. How do I fit in regards to the strategies I'll develop for my organization? And then how do I manage my managers to be successful where I get the benefit of them being successful?
So if you're at that level, then you talk about strategy, the people side of things. And there's obviously putting out fires and managing kind of the yesterday. How do you encourage people to kind of split their time when they're at that director or manager of manager levels? Why should they really be focusing 50, 60%, whatever it looks like, on what activity versus the rest?
My number one axiom is focus on what your boss wants.
Right.
If you focus on what your boss wants, you're going to have a high probability of being successful. However, you do still have to work those fires that come up. But you ask about a specific maybe an algorithm to decide.
It's like what's the most important thing to focus on? You know, people? Is it the strategy? Is it firefighting? I mean, I know everything's important.
Yeah, but so in most organizations, you know, we talk about people, processes, and systems, and normally systems end up being the last because you got to spend money to get systems. Number one, though, becomes the people in the organization and the processes that you put in place, because that's how you enable success, whether it's sourcing for a particular product or doing supplier performance management or whatever those things are. What happens, though, is when one of these fires come up, the way I approach it is that I need to assess the problem.
Yeah.
How big is this fire?
Right.
Okay. And do I need to allocate resource time to it, or do I need to allocate my time to it? And so that's part of the from a management standpoint. Am I delegating appropriately, or am I trying to do everything myself? And you can't do everything yourself. So that is the methodology that I use to determine what percent of my effort I focus on firefighters versus, you know, focusing on the strategic work that I'm trying to get accomplished.
Right. And it's always difficult, I find, to at least carve out a little bit of your time, despite everything else going on, to the strategy or to the learning what's happening in the industry or some of the disruptions that are coming down, because it's really easy to be consumed in your inbox and consumed in today. But I think that if you don't at least make a really concerted effort to dedicate, and it might even be like half an hour a day, just block half an hour in your calendar a day to think about some of those things you know you have to think about and that you act on, but you always forget about because they're not important today. You can kind of leave them tomorrow, but you keep leaving them to tomorrow, and then tomorrow never comes.
Yeah. I think the blocking of time is very important, though, and I've had situations where an individual or an organization, you know, they throw up their hands and they say, well, I can't get X done because why wasn't this completed? I don't have time. I was working on X. I was working on Y. And I said, well, I saw you in the cafeteria for a couple of hours there, and you were eating and talking and joking.
Right.
So sometimes it comes down to allocation of time.
Prioritization.
That's right. Prioritization of time. And then secondly, it's blocking time on your calendar, even whether it's related to strategic thinking or whether it's related to actually completing some of those A items that you have on your list.
Right.
Because routinely the A items, which are the most complicated, that requires the longer period of time to complete, we tend to put them off until the last minute. Because we do a lot of C items, because at the end of the day, you say, boy, I got all of this stuff done.
Look at all that email that's disappeared.
That's
now.
right.
All those.
But it doesn't matter to anybody, you know, what you actually got completed. So I think, yes, prioritizing your time and then blocking time is very important.
So we got to start wrapping up now, because I don't want to be the cause of you missing your flight later this afternoon, although we could talk for a lot longer, I'm sure.
We could.
And hopefully we will get the chance to do that again in the future.
Right.
You know, the final question I had as kind of a wrap-up is, just as you reflect on your career today, are there things that you wish you'd have known earlier in your career that you know today that may have changed some of your decisions that you made as you went through your career?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that I learned, or that I know today that I wish I had known, goes back to the discussion around mentoring. For a long time, I felt that if I focused on my work and did it well, at some point in time, I would be recognized for it. And for many years, that was not the case.
Right.
It was not the case. When I finally woke up, the light bulb, came on, and I ended up speaking with one of the VPs in the organization. He gave me some insights in regards to engagement and networking. And which I had not even considered. I was like, I don't play golf, so I'm not dealing with those guys. But quite frankly, you don't have to play golf. But the mentoring piece and the networking piece that I recognize now as being an enabler to success. I wish I had known that many years before in my career.
And networking is so, that's the thing that I find really difficult. And maybe that's, I'm an introvert. rather than extrovert. And so you put me in a room like we've had at the conference, and I'm wanting to find where the back of the room is rather than where the front of the room is. And also right at the beginning, you talked about challenging yourself to do things that you may be uncomfortable with. So that's where I feel that a lot of the, like even what I'm doing with the podcast, a lot of that was around doing things that I wasn't comfortable with, because I know that it's important to me in my career development that you have to do these things.
Absolutely.
So you're kind of stepping out of your comfort zone.
Yep.
Well, Alex, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. What I just want to say is that the show notes for today's episode is just a summary of what we talked about. They'll be at artofprocurement.com/career decisions. That's artofprocurement.com/career decisions. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and it's been a pleasure, and I do look forward to another opportunity.
Me too. Thanks, Alex.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.